So I am Kurt Nelson, and I work at Pinterest on the Android platform team. I will probably also accidentally say Android X because that's what we call ourselves internally, and we used it first. So, but yeah, externally say Android platform. So I'm here to talk about kind of what we are in the process of doing right now, and then also having worked at both Uber and Google on similar teams, how this is kind of a recurring theme I've seen in bigger apps. And yeah, that's using Jetpack libraries in your big or older app. So I want to start by talking about platform teams and their importance in these cases and kind of what they do, what we do, and why we exist. So platform teams tend to work on mobile-wide issues, so things that are across the whole app, or in the case of a company with many apps, across all the apps. And we also work in tandem, often with build teams or infrastructure teams, CI, test tooling, anything along those lines. And this is so that feature developers and people working on product hopefully just don't have to think about these things, and they just can code. Their build is fast, their CI runs, and everyone is very happy. Also, specifically at Pinterest, we are broken up into multiple parts of platform teams. So there's Android, and then we have an iOS equivalent, a front-end web, and then a team that handles our API surface. And so all these platform teams work together to hopefully make it so feature devs can just concentrate on feature work. And part of another big part of our role, besides just keeping the lights on and keeping things going, is looking forward at the big picture. So at all times, we want to try and see the big picture of the whole app across features, in addition to what's happening in the future. So what is happening in the Android ecosystem, what is happening with our product roadmap, et cetera. And part of that is also making sure that we stay stable, secure, and performant in the future. And then we also often are looking at new technologies, new libraries as they come out, or even just version bumps. We often look at things like SDK, the Android SDK upgrades, which, for example, Beta 3 went API stable this week. So we will be probably looking at that very soon. And so this is where Jetpack falls into this, is that when Google did something like Jetpack, we're like, oh, okay, now we have all these new things to look at and consider. And then we kind of need to play with it, and hopefully we make the mistakes while feature teams are doing their work. And then when we say, hey, we're ready to go with the library upgrade or the new tech, it just works. Yeah, and in addition to just libraries, also architecture patterns. So right now, there's an SBA sticker on my laptop. We are in the middle of a big re-architecture of our app. And part of that architecture is making sure we align with Jetpack going forward. And yeah, we pay attention to what's going on in the wider Android community, so that's why a lot of us are here. And I noticed that a lot of companies, I think the whole Reddit platform team is here, a lot of the Uber platform team, and then of course some Googlers around. And another part of that is trying to communicate early with these other companies or library maintainers while they're still under development, so that we can try them out in our app and say, hey, we have this one weird little issue because our app is huge, or our build performance is bad, and catching those bugs early and hopefully fixing them before it ships out to the wider community. And the one thing that we have way less control over is Android changes. So because Google often works kind of in a black box, and we also don't necessarily have a choice, like we are going to have to support the new version of Android eventually when it comes out. So trying to get to that early and test it out before it becomes a problem. And of course, one of the big examples of this was the shift to Kotlin, which I think we all knew was coming. And then when Google said, hey, Kotlin's officially supported, we weren't surprised. And one thing that we did well at Pinterest was support Kotlin relatively early in the whole code base. And right now we are definitely super majority of the base is Kotlin. A counterexample of this was when at Uber, we had to hold off on officially supporting Kotlin because we were running into build performance issues. So part of that was we're like, hey, I know Google says it's officially supported, but here we can't support it yet because we don't want your build taking 15 minutes. Jetpack Compose is something that we are struggling with at Pinterest compared to Kotlin to get in early for similar reasons that Uber had problems with Kotlin, is because we are hitting performance issues with Jetpack Compose that other people are not. And part of that is just the nature of our app is a image-heavy feed that people scroll through. And so we are, in this case, constantly running A/B tests and ensuring that we're always checking new versions to ensure that when we do adopt it, we at least know any performance hit we're taking if we do take it. And so this is a Jetpack library that we would love to adopt as soon as possible, but we just can't right now. And if you go pull the recording when they go up from yesterday, in the last slot, there was the panel on Jetpack Compose, and my teammate Christina was on that panel. And there's also a Kotlin Conf talk by her on more in detail on specifically kind of what we're running into with Compose. The other duty of our platform team is we need to make sure that our 100+ engineers all working in our repo are kind of on the same page. You don't need everyone immediately writing in the new thing or using it at expert level, but if we say, hey, we support Kotlin, you need to make sure that there's at least people around to code review that Kotlin and ensure the quality is maintained. So yeah, at a large organization, we have to teach about it, then roll out access, stay in the loop on code review, and then also make sure that whatever was done previously has a plan to be cleaned up. And it's hard to just suddenly get 100+ engineers in a distributed environment to know about a new technology. You can't just say, hey, we shipped the thing, go use it. And then we also have to decide at what point do we say, you can't do that anymore, sorry, that pattern is no longer allowed, and deciding how long this period is going to be between introducing a new replacement technology and, as we'd say, just actually writing a linter or something to essentially ban the usage of the old technology. We need a migration plan. And there's a bunch of different options on how you can do this, and I go into this later on kind of how we're looking at certain Jetpack libraries and what needs to be done. But are teams in charge of migrating? Are we doing it? Or do we just say, hey, here's a new thing. If you want to do the old thing, that's still okay. Also, just being able to run experiments and A/B test any of these changes to ensure we are not hurting our business metrics or the user experience. So now, more specific to Jetpack. And when I worked at Google, it was right around the time Jetpack was starting. And it's kind of funny to see how, at that time, which was essentially 5 years ago now, we were running into a lot of the same issues that we're seeing at Pinterest now, and maybe some of you are seeing currently in your apps. So back then, everyone in the wider community, I feel like, was still using all the Square libraries. You had your OKHTTP or Picasso, whatever you're using for JSON parsing. We were all kind of using piecemeal but similar community libraries. And inside of Google, for the internal apps in the independent of Android apps, so things like Gmail, Calendar, Allo at the time, and whatever chat apps existed that day. And so there, for example, we had a fork of Glide in our repo. We had a bunch of protocol buffer handling code, and it was all just kind of fragmented, custom, weird, and a pain to maintain. But we had a team to do it, and the Google suite of apps is big, so we're talking probably 20+ apps, all at least using this shared code. And so an interesting oddity, or I guess artifact, is back at this time at least, and I'm not up to date on this, but Google has always had these things they call product areas. And Android and the Android operating system was always basically only sharing direct, or the only way to get through the chain was through like CEO level. And so we were over there doing our own little thing in the internal apps, while the Android team was doing their thing in open source and in Garrett. And this wasn't the best idea, or it wasn't functional, and it was just kind of how it organically grew. So we were totally shipping our org chart. And so Google Plus was a huge push on, and it was a really solid Android app too back in the day. And when it got killed off, they were like, hey, this is good. Let's take these architecture patterns and start using them internally. And so that's what turned into what became my team, the Frameworks Android team, not to be confused with the Android Framework team. And so this team, TikTok, also before TikTok was a thing, it was Wizard of Oz character TikTok. And so in the Google 3, the Google monorepo, it became the standard framework. So this was stacked on top of kind of that fragmented custom code, but at least at this point we were all aligned. Optionally, if an app wanted to, they could say, hey, I want to use TikTok, and then we would handle all these library type issues for them. And so we ended up with something, well, Hilt came out of Dagger, and we built it for TikTok to allow you to isolate your components and do all the Hilty things that Hilt does. And so we built this. We built something kind of like Jetpack Data Store. Android was overdoing their own thing. They had started doing way more libraries. And we had this internal split, but at least here we started talking to each other. And it was just a fragmented mess. So finally, at the time it was just, hey, we're going to do this Android X thingy and try and sort this out and figure out what belongs in the operating system and Garrett and shipping in an image versus in application layer code. And it was messy, but we're like, hey, we're going to kind of align on each other. And this is where Jetifier happened, where we're like, hey, we have to rename all these and essentially just copy the code out of AOSP itself and into separate libraries, but we're going to rename space it all so that we can slowly diverge. And a prime example, or a prime example of why my team at least, really liked this, is we had our data store type thing because shared preferences is so embedded into the OS, and there's implementation differences depending on what OS version you're running on that can result in different lossiness and callbacks. And so we're like, hey, this is great. We're going to basically, even if we just copy paste current shared preferences into a separate repo and point at that, and then embed that in the app, at least our app will work consistently across devices. So we started doing this piecemeal migration, and it was one of those where it's like, hey, we have this new way. If you want to write new code on top of it, please do. We'll take care of Jetpack. We're making sure we're on top of Jetpack for you. And if you weren't sitting on the framework, our framework, you were kind of on your own, but at least now there was a nice, consistent way without having to do anything. So yeah, if you were on our Google Plus framework, we took care of it for you. You could just sit there and write your feature code, and we would update things underneath. So this is all 2015 through 2017-ish. Meanwhile, over at Pinterest, the app was started in 2012, and as of this week when I ran the numbers, over 700 unique committers, and the average age of code that is committed is in the O of years space. I was looking at, I think the average was like 1.5-ish. So, and that's just because a lot of the feature code's new. The framework code is 5-6 years old. And so Pinterest, it was one app and one repo with, as of today, we have around 100 monthly active committers. And luckily, we only have really one app at this point and a not crazy big repo. A counterexample is at Uber. When I was there, we had over 10 apps in one monorepo at one time, all shipping. And with 100 committers in the repo back in, not 100 committers back in 2015, but with that older code base, Pinterest had to solve these problems too that Google had. We have fragmentation, we're having to worry about libraries and keep things consistent. So back, I think it was 2016 is when it entered the code base, but it looks like it was ported in from somewhere else. We created something called Screen Manager. And this was back when fragments were painful and error prone. And he would often be like, I don't know what's wrong. I'm going to just do commit allowing state loss and hope it works in prod. And so Pinterest made something called Screen Manager is kind of our own fragment manager. And the goal was to simplify it, get rid of the code we don't need, and make it so developers didn't have to worry about fragment problems. So we have this API here for a screen, and it looks really innocent because, oh, two steps up, 2 steps down, a destroy. You can get the view off this thing. And that was the idea here. And it was, symmetric teardown, nothing crazy. Now, the real gotcha here is in that screen description object. So you would have your screen, and you would bind in a screen description. And the screen description was absolutely, this whole thing was appropriate at the time. The screen description was a problem, but I'll get to that in a second. Our app is mainly full pages, so we aren't doing a whole lot of like 2 fragments on at once or multi-activity or anything like that. The app was MVP. This API worked with the MVP style framework, and it solved fragment transaction shenanigans or anything like that. Fragments were essentially overkill and not worth the pain at the time. The problem is that that screen description has essentially the same logic as Fragment Manager, but we had to do it ourselves. And if you're used to looking at APIs here, you're probably like, oh, why do you have a class in there? That's scary. And that is the correct feeling, is that now you have a class object in here. Everything else is pretty common, very similar to a fragment. You have your nav arguments in a bundle. You have instance state in a bundle. You can return something from it. But we're using the class to say, what is this screen and how to render it? Which means, of course, our good old friend reflection. And then we have a screen manager class that is basically fragment manager. And it has a class lookup map to try and cache the reflection. And it calls new instance. And then the argument bundle is handled by us internally. And they're on. So it's fragment manager, but it's not actually fragment manager. So now that fragments are in a good spot and Jetpack Nav is out, and we can update fragment regularly, it's what, month? I feel like every month or 2 there's at least a alpha bump. And so now we're like, okay, how do we get out of this? What do we do to kind of get back with mainline Android? And this comes down to, it's kind of a project management and prioritization problem. We know we have this long list of things we want to do, but what do we want to do first? Do we want to start with Jetpack Nav? Jetpack Data Store, how important is that? Are we having issues with our data layer? We know our lifecycle and fragments are weird, but are they causing us developer pain? Are they causing us production issues? Where's the issues? Hilt, that was a no-brainer, already done. Secret, already done. That's right in the slides. We'd like to use Compose at some point, and then there's, of course, the knock-on things like ViewPager 2, anything that holds a fragment, any third-party library that consumes fragmenty things. We have to decide, how do we start untangling our hairball? And beyond the just like, hey, what do we like as far as what library do we get excited about, is we need to maintain our reliability. We can't just say, hey, we're cutting over to this new thing and then start crashing more. Some of these are just inherently going to be slow to roll out. Switching out your data storage layer is going to take multiple releases. You need to let it soak where you have your caches migrating over to the new system. You need to validate that they're moving over correctly. Then you need to read from the new one, write to both read from one, eventually then cleaning up. So that's probably, as I'm saying in best case, is our estimate right now, like 6 months. We also have unknowns in our legacy code because it started in 2012, and there are people who are not at the company anymore. We also have to make sure that developers are comfortable with whatever changes we do and are prepared for it and know how to use them. And then along this whole time, we have to still get done our normal day-to-day work, keep the lights on, incident response, handle bugs, anything of that nature. And a lot of people are like, hey, but we want to use the new shiny right now. And this was definitely true at Uber with Kotlin. It's like, hey, but I want to use Kotlin. And we're like, well, okay, there you can use it, but we're kind of not going to be able to support you anymore if your build times go off a cliff. For us, like Compose, we'd love for people to use Compose and know it if you're on some edge of the app that's not performance critical, maybe you can go ahead and use it. But once again, with the disclaimer of if it stops compiling, we'll try and help you, but no promises there. Personally, for me, and being newish at the company, is the risk in the unknown unknowns. Is there are parts of the code base that no one really has looked at recently, and we don't have a right risk assessment of what is Screen Manager doing deep in this reflection, this stack of reflection all the way down. And so another thing with all these libraries is they are kind of, we want the people to move to them using coroutines when possible. But we just kind of said now, hey, go use coroutines if you want to, and we're still in the process of making sure that the coroutine experience is good. And so where do we say, no, at that RX Java 2, at least we don't have RX Java 1, that RX Java 2 is like, that code is really ugly and it's doing some weird thread hops, but we'll just leave it for now while we swap out this library, versus, okay, this is a risky API. You really should use structured concurrency and coroutines. So this is kind of another little facet to migrations per library is, do we want to say, just go for it, go all the way to the newest APIs? Or do we say, hey, we're going to have some bridge layers in here? And the Jetpack libraries specifically are extra scary. Like any library upgrade has all these problems, but maybe if your image loading library is slow one day or breaks, it doesn't bring down the whole app or make it so you can't open your app. So with any of these core Jetpack Android X space, or any of the Google libraries, honestly, so Google Play services too, they're extra risky, so you need to do extra assessment. And also certain upgrades are easier than others in this way. Like switching out your image loader, all of the 3 semi-popular image loading libraries are all essentially you need a context, what you're loading and where to put it. And so switching between them is not a huge ordeal, or if something goes wrong, we can just say, oops, let's go back. And then moving from Dagger to Hilt is not horrible because Hilt is a superset of Dagger. And you can sit there and break up the migration so you aren't just like, hey, today it's now all Hilt. And then, it fails to launch because you forgot something in your root dependencies. Another trick when prioritizing is, what can you outsource from your own team? Whether it's external contractors, internal teams who maybe have spare cycles, people who are just evangelists and excited about a new technology. If you have a whole lot of people excited about using a library, you can probably convince them to do some of your work for you. Or at least if you assign them some bugs for their feature, they're way more likely to tackle it because they're interested. One spot where this has gone very well for us is doing the Java to Kotlin jump. We still have lingering Java, and it's mainly in our core mystery classes, like Screen Manager stuff. But one thing we can do to de-risk this is we were able to get an external team from us to turn on null away and burn down all the suppressions. So now at least our Java code is more null safe than it was. So if I walk up to a class, I'm like, ew, it's Java still, and I hit the conversion button, it's less dangerous than it was before. It's still risky in these core libraries, especially if we don't have a way to swap in and out, which is why here for Screen Manager, for example, hopefully we can just jump to the new thing instead of trying to fix it up. But this is a good case where the platform team itself doesn't need to do all the lifting. So let's talk some options for doing your migrations. And I'm going to kind of rank these in from minimal to maximum disruption. So anytime you're looking at, okay, we want to adopt this new Jetpack library, which of these methods do you need to take to move to it? So the simplest one is say, this is only for new code. There's no expectation to adjust any legacy code. And a good example of this is Jetpack Nav in a relatively clean app, not ours. You could say, hey, if you're adding new features, stick them in the nav tree. And then if you're writing a new jump to that code, use the nav tree. And maybe you have some call sites where you have to update it, but it's not a migration per se even. And in our case, we can't exactly do this because our nav framework is so custom and reflection-y, we're going to have to chunk it up. But that's a us problem, not a Jetpack Nav problem. You can also do a entirely under the hood migration. So this is where, maybe the exposed API doesn't really change, or at least the functionality doesn't change. As long as we can maintain a consistent interface, we can do our own A/B experimentation tests as a framework team without disrupting anyone. So for example here, image loading, if you have one interface that you then just pass to Glide or Picasso, we can sit there underneath and secretly switch on Glide for 10% of users and look at our metrics and mess with this as a platform team. Another one is our shared preferences to data store. We already had an interface on shared preferences that was ours. So we just slowly migrate it underneath. Sorry. The next one up is doing an actual shim layer. So for our coroutine, RX coroutines migration, this is how we're doing it. We're going to offer a way to use either or, and then underneath we'll just map it to whatever is actually being used. So the developer can say, I want the RX version, and we'll maybe just pass it through to our RX implementation, or they'll use the what looks like coroutines, and we'll just underneath do the as flow conversion, and then pass it to the RX code. But then with the shim, we are decoupling the new API from the new implementation. So we can then, at our leisure, or at another team's leisure if it's their code, say, hey, we put the shim in here, so developers are all now stable, but when you get around to it, switch out from using RX to coroutines under the hood. And then you can also often experiment on this and A/B test it. Next up is the fully central migration. And this is how we did Dagger to Hilt. We had someone on our team who just basically for quite a while was just slogging through it and converting code from Dagger over to Hilt. And here, yeah, you may maybe occasionally have to engage some feature teams or some testing to make sure you aren't breaking anything. But over a period of months, you just open pull requests with the movement and have the feature team review it. And hopefully, it's relatively risk-free. It's just work on the platform team. The good thing is that you then have a local expert on Hilt, basically. And going forward, when someone has Hilt problems, you know exactly who to send the bug to. This is likely how we will tackle Jetpack navigation. We'll do the same thing. We'll just say, OK, we're going to own converting chunks of the app at a time, and hopefully shield feature teams from having to deal with that migration. Next up is the distributed self-service. So here, instead of us doing it all as one person or one team, we have some documentation, we have some example PRs, we probably do the first couple, and we say, hey teams, we'd like you to migrate to this new thing, in a reasonable time, like maybe in the next 2 years, just put it in your roadmap. And then, you'll let this run for a while, and you eventually get to the point where no one's migrating anymore and there's just abandoned code left. So then someone takes over on platform and does a final cleanup and then retires the old style of code. At this point, you are probably engaging some sort of project manager to just track all the teams and what's going on and where the debt is. Then the nuclear option is the distributed mandate, where you often get an exec or a director level person to say, okay, yes, this is business critical or a security issue or some existential threat, and you say, hey, you must be on this new thing by the end of this quarter, or you'll just be getting emailed constantly by someone every day asking for progress updates. And this is hopefully avoidable by just doing migrations earlier and getting off of legacy code and, for example, making sure we're on Jetpack stuff so that we can do minor version updates instead of panic mode, like some big security issues somewhere. And this one's thrashy, but sometimes it is absolutely necessary. So where are we now at Pinterest? Well, we are now basically fully on Hilt as of earlier this year, which is really nice now. It's a good first step for breaking up our apps so that all these other migrations are a little bit more, or they're just less painful because we can stick something in a Hilt component and we have it everywhere in the right spot and we're not leaking it anymore. Data store we're in progress on. This is just going to be a long, slow burn of testing and ensuring our data's safe. Luckily, and I think this is true for almost everyone, is the one thing you really, really care about is just that your API key does, or your user's token doesn't get blown away. So you might be able to say, hey, caches, we'll just bust these caches, worst case. But making sure that you don't log everyone out is very important. Compose, we're blocked on for now. As we said, we want some more performance improvements out of it before we go wide on it. Android X lifecycle, we are now, luckily, we were able to kind of do a shim where you can now request a lifecycle scope from your activity or your fragment or your view, and from your perspective, it works right. That's, of course, from your perspective, it works right, and it is no worse than Screen Manager, but it's definitely not right. So next step there is going to be untangling that and figuring out how can we use the real implementation versus our hand-rolled, hacky, scary code that please don't look at it. As far as other Jetpack libraries, lower priority, I feel like. And maybe we'll have an update on how we tackle some of those things later. So thank you.